Today, investing in uncertain times. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to this post covering finance and problem news with a distinctively Australian flavour. Today, I'm joined by Robert Kiyosaki. Hi, Robert.
Hello, how are you doing? Martin, I like your podcast. You do a good job.
Thank you very much. Well, I appreciate that, and great to have you back on the show again. And boy, we are in really uncertain times at the moment. You know, the Fed is panicking on inflation. They're still stoking the quantitative easing programs, though. And, you know, a lot of investors are getting really spooked as to what to do. So let's break it into two parts. Do you think the Fed is doing the right thing? Do you think they know what they're doing? And then secondly, let's talk about what we need to do in response to what they're doing.
Well, I think that's the question of all questions. I mean, it's more than the Fed, Martin. It's more than the Fed. Most people haven't read this book here. It's called the Communist Manifesto. And in 1965, I left Hawaii and I went to school in New York City. I went to military school. And I had to read this book here. Well, people should read this book. This book was written in 1848. And what the average person doesn't understand is that our governments are basically communist today. And the Fed is a communist organization. The a central bank is communist. So are trade unions. And those are things that people do not realize is happening to them because they don't study these books. So I wrote this book here. This is my latest. This book is called the Capitalist Manifesto. And that's where you and I get along because we're capitalists. But most people are communists, like my poor dad, a school teacher, head of education, and didn't know he was really Marxist, but because he never read this book. So that's why I enjoy talking to you, because without the big macro picture throughout history, people cannot see what's going on.
Right. So, and the key point there is that the Marxist philosophy is central intervention, right? It's control, it's intervention, it's basically taking decisions away from the natural market and creating, something which is completely different.
Yeah, and so if you want to understand what's going on today, this book was written in 1848. It's only about 50 pages. To catch up, I had to write this book here, about 500 pages. But this book here, unfortunately, is one of the most influential books ever written in history, 1848. And if you read it, you can see what's happening today much clearer. So that's why I enjoy your podcast. I enjoy talking to you, because a lot of journalists, as you know, are so hard left. They're the Leaning Tower of Pizza on the left side,
Well, this is interesting, the way that journalists respond to what the Fed says. They almost sort of tease apart every single word that they say every time a statement's made. It seems to me that, central bankers are almost, worshipped as, the gods of the current age, but I'm not sure they really know what they're doing.
Yeah, but wait, it gets worse. There's another book that was written that also goes throughout history, and it was called The Fourth Turning. And those guys are on the mark. And so the fourth turning is based upon a human life's about 80 years, let's say. So every fourth turning, there's this major change. And today we're in a fourth turning. And what the book said was that the mark of a fourth turning, this is the scary part. It follows what this book has said. It is marked by a weak leader and war. Every time there's a fourth turning, we have a weak leader and war. And I cannot think of a weaker leader than Joe Biden. And so why Aussies are happy in Aussie land, the greatest country on earth. I love Australia. I've been coming here since 1972. The world is led by an incompetent, bumbling buffoon named Biden. That's the real worry.
Right, and we're also in the situation where we have political instability and uncertainty in other major countries, China, for example, and other places too. So the stakes are very high, aren't they? And you've got to ask the question again: do people really know what they're getting into and what they're actually doing, or as you say, are they just bumbling along?
Yeah. And let me give you another piece of macro, just so you understand how screwed up I am. Because most people, when they invest, they look micro. Like let's say real estate. Like I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I don't invest here. I invest other places that are better to invest. But the average person is an expert on Phoenix, just like the average person in Hobart is an expert on Hobart. But they miss the big picture. And so in time, this is the biggest change in world history. It's happened every several hundred years. Number one, what happens is you monetize debt, and that's called printing money. That's the Federal Reserve Bank. Number two, there's massive dissent. Martin, this is the first time I've seen America so divided. They're firing people not taking the COVID shot. I don't know what the heck they're up to. But people are refusing to take the COVID shot. And I'm not against the vaccine. I'm against the mandate. Why force us to do something we don't want to do? So this is dividing America, and it's never been before. And then third, and this is throughout history, is a rise of a new superpower. And as Aussies know, that superpower is China. I'm so old. I went to China when they didn't even have a handheld calculator. They were so primitive. As soon as Nixon opened the doors of China, I decided I'd best go see it as soon as possible. So I crossed from Hong Kong through Macau and all this stuff and went to see China. And I tell you, the Chinese are more capitalist than we ever were. They understand they got to produce to make money. So they produce us cheap goods. They take our dollars and they reinvest in U.S. treasuries and Aussie property and all this. So the Chinese are the world power today. So when you look at what's going to happen next, China is now rattling the saber. When I was a kid, the place was called Formosa. Now it's called Taiwan. And when I was a kid, they were shelling Formosa from China. And they made this treaty that said, okay, we'll have a treaty that you guys call peace, and then later on we'll merge into one country. Well, I don't think Taiwan's going to merge. And I think the Chinese are going to go to war. It's the same as Putin is saying we're going to take the Ukraine. And then we have this incompetent, bumbling Biden who screws up an evacuation out of Afghanistan, opens the southern border. I don't know what else that guy has done. So the stars are lining up, Martin. The stars are lining up.
So the picture you're painting, which is, I think, one of the reasons why people feel so uncertain at the moment, of relatively unclear decisions being taken or not being taken at all, right? A set of doctrines that basically seem to me to protect markets and protect stock prices at any cost, but actually are not focusing on the real issues. So the question I've got for you then, Robert, is how do investors make any sense of this crazy, crazy world that we're in?
Well, that's why, I'll be doing this course. I wish I was going to be there in person. It's called the Masters of Property on January 22nd, and I plug it. But you better find out who knows what they're talking about. And the reason I say that is when I talk to for all these years, Martin, a person bought a house, let's say for $100,000, and today it's worth $200,000. So they think they're Donald Trump. And then the worst thing that happened is they got this $100,000 equity sitting there, and the bank say, "Why don't you borrow it out and go take a trip to Fiji?" So, because of lack of financial education, all Rich Dad Poor Dad is a book on financial education of my rich dad, not my poor dad. And in Rich Dad Poor Dad, this is 25 years ago this year, I said your house is not an asset, savers are losers, and the rich don't work for money. And I got hammered for that back 25 years ago. And today, Rich Dad Poor Dad is still number 20 in Amazon throughout the world. And just because there was something as simple as no financial education in schools, I became a richer man. And I didn't write the book to get rich. I just wrote the book the same way as you do podcasts and all this. education is the most vital thing other than air, water, and food that we need today. And when you have bad education and bad information, you're in trouble.
Yes, and certainly here in Australia, I survey households all the time, and I'm surprised at just how little people understand about even simple things like cash flow, for example, and even simple things like what interest rates really cost and what compounding does and all of those things. Things which, frankly, to you and me, are simple, basic fundamentals as to how the world works, but most people don't get them, and therefore they don't make decisions on good basis because they don't actually have the basic understanding to be able to make those good decisions. So that's why what you do and what I do is to try and help people get better information and to make better decisions.
Yeah, and then we get hammered for being capitalists. We are capitalists. I'm not a socialist, I'm not a Marxist. And we're in very serious trouble today. Like I said, I love Aussie. I've been coming there since 1972. It's a rich country. It is the lucky country. But you have a Marxist government. And that's what's scary. Your education is Marxist, same as ours.
So if you think about investing, right? So, people will be looking at the stock markets and saying, well, gee, they look overvalued at the moment. They might look at gold or silver or crypto or property. I mean, all of the asset classes have issues attached to them, right? So there is no silver bullet, in my mind at least. But are there some asset classes that stand the test of time in your mind?
I'm sure there are. I'm just not good at stocks. I own stocks, but they're companies I took public. That's the difference. I am a control freak. So I don't like investing in somebody else's asset. I hate to say that. So don't ask me about stocks, but I know my stocks because I'm the controller of them. The same as my property, I control my property. Same as my business, I control my property. And that's why if you read Rich Dad, Poor Dad 25 years ago, so the rich don't work for money. What the rich do is they work for assets that they control. I'm an entrepreneur. I want to control my future. And to do that required a lot of study and time and all this. And so that's why I said in 1965, when I left Hawaii, I went to military school in New York, and this was the book we had to study. If you understand communism, you understand what Marx was writing in 1848, you'll see it happening today. That's what's frightening.
And just sort of going further into the property discussion, because as you say, at least if you have property, then you understand it and can see it and feel it and touch it. But I guess my question is all property equally good? Or do you actually have to go through some sort of process to be able to figure out, where the good versus the bad is, both in terms of types of property, locations? Because I get a lot of people saying, well, in Australia, properties double every 7 years regardless. And I think that's a bit simplistic, frankly. Well,
anytime somebody said property always goes up in value. I mean, remember 2008 wasn't that long ago. But this is the good news, Martin. I made more money in 2008 because I was waiting for it. And today you can do the same thing. That if you're waiting for the biggest, Martin, this is not just a 2008 crash. This is a change of history. This is a change in the history of the world. The history of the world going forward from here will never be the same. So all it means is the reason we have the masters of property and all this, you better start studying from people who know what they're talking about. My poor dad was a PhD, went to Stanford, University of Chicago, Northwestern. He kept calling our house an asset. And my rich dad never went to school. He says, oh yeah, dad may be a PhD, but he knows nothing about property. So as a 9-year-old boy, I started realizing I better choose my teachers wisely. And so that's why the masters of property.
And, pushing that slightly further, it's interesting that there are many property investors in Australia who, from a cash flow perspective, are underwater. In other words, they actually don't get enough income coming in from their rents to cover all the costs of the property and the maintenance, et cetera, et cetera. So what they're doing is they're banking on property appreciation. Now, the question I've got for you is, given where we are and given, frankly, that property is probably overvalued at the moment, given the quantitative easing and everything else, right? Is that something that you should be hanging your hat on, or do you think people should be a little bit more cautious and careful?
I would say this. On top of that, you guys have negative gearing, which is the most stupid thing ever. The government gives you a tax break to lose money. I mean, give me a break. Give me a break. That's not capitalism. That's communism. But the thing I was just telling you, so you need to be an entrepreneur today. The idea of job security. I mean, you could be a medical doctor and you refuse to take the vaccine, they'll fire you. You know what I mean? We're become a totalitarian state. So I just heard the story of this young guy. He said, "Oh, because I did, he just loves what we teach and all this stuff." So this bank went out of business, and so nobody had use for the bank because banks are going out of business. So he bought the bank. He put a coffee shop in it. He says, "I'm making so much money because the bank is a perfect coffee shop." I have another guy who bought a church because nobody goes to church today either. So he bought the church and he built a tech center out of it. So he put an economic value into the property, not just the building, the sticks and bricks. So that's why I'm pretty optimistic about the future, but I'm concerned about my fellow human beings because the gap between the rich and poor is too wide today. And that's why I wrote this book here, The Rich Dad, Poor Dad, because we should have financial education, some of it. And then I wrote this book here, the Capitalist Manifesto, 500 pages in response to a 50-page book. It's one of the most influential books in world history, but nobody reads it. And it's about the future.
And the point you're making is being an entrepreneur is an attitude of mind, isn't it? Right? It's a different way of thinking. And that is the fundamental point of difference, right? And as I've read some of your books and I talk to other people, those who actually understand that being an entrepreneur is different stands a chance of actually positioning better for the future. But many people just find that very hard to get to.
Yeah, most people want job security, and I understand, but that's an industrialist idea. And I think what's coming about, we're going into out of the industrial age, we're going into the cyber age. That's going to change everything. So it's really time to get smarter. That's why I recommend seminars and talking to real people who are doing the real thing. You don't have to believe a word they say, but I do listen to them. I do listen to you, Martin. I do follow your podcast.
22nd of January, Saturday, that's when the seminar is on. What is the one message you want to leave with people, through that seminar?
Number one thing is choose your teachers wisely. That's what I had to do. I had to choose to listen to my rich dad or my poor dad. And my poor dad was a PhD. My rich dad had no college education at all. But it was a tough decision as a 9-year-old boy. So I go listen to my rich dad. And that, there was a division between my father and I. But both are good men, don't get me wrong. But we need to choose our teachers more wisely today than ever before. And that's why the masters of property. You go there, listen to them. You choose the wrong teacher. That's your fault.
Robert, thank you very much for your time today. Always great to catch up with you. And I'm sure we'll chat again down the tracks. But this is an important conversation. And guys, entrepreneurship is something you can learn. And if you do learn it, you can make things very different for you. Thank you very much, Robert.
Keep up the good work, Warren. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.